Hey there, I'm Sam, and I'm 72 years old. I thought I'd seen it all, but man, some things still catch you off guard. I was in the hospital, recovering from a minor surgery. No big deal, but at my age, even a splinter feels like a major issue. Hospitals aren't my favorite place, but there I was, stuck in one of those rock-hard beds, trying to pass the time. One day, I was reading a book, trying to distract myself, when I saw a little girl being brought in. She looked like she was asleep. They put her in the bed next to mine, separated by a thin curtain. I figured it was just another routine admission, but that night, things got weird. It was late when I first heard her. Her voice was soft and scared. "Sir?" she whispered. I opened my eyes. The room was dark, with just a sliver of light from the hallway. I cleared my throat and answered, "What's up, kiddo?" There was a pause. Then she said, "I'm scared." I thought of my granddaughter. She was the same age and used to get scared easily too. "It's just the hospital," I told her. "In the morning, everything will look better." We started talking. She asked me about my life, my family. I was happy to chat, happy to have someone to talk to in that lonely place. But then she asked something strange. "Are you ready to die yet?" I was taken aback. "What do you mean?" I asked. "If he's ready to die. Because all old people do sooner or later," she said. I felt a chill. Her voice was still childish, but the words, they weren't something a kid her age should say. I tried to laugh it off. "Well, I hope it's not soon. I've still got a lot to do." But she didn't let it go. "But what if he discovers that heaven and hell are the same thing? They're all the same." I was speechless. I tried to change the subject, but she laughed and said, "Good night, old man." I didn't answer. That night, I lay awake, staring at the curtain. Something told me there was something very wrong with that little girl. The next morning, her parents arrived. They looked worried and tired. I told them I'd talked to their daughter the night before, trying to sound casual. But their reaction was not what I expected. They looked at each other, astonished and almost angry. "Sir, our daughter is mute," the mother said. "She was born unable to speak." Couldn't believe it. My mind raced as they opened the curtain. There was the little girl, her eyes watery, throwing herself at her parents and sobbing. She started signing frantically, telling them what she'd seen the night before. Her parents' expressions changed from concern to sheer terror. "Our daughter says that all night, a man was squatting over her bed, watching her and smiling. A faceless black figure, with just a twisted smile. And that all night, that man was talking to you, with a little girl's voice." I don't remember how long I stayed silent. The idea that something or someone had pretended to be the little girl to talk to me all night was terrifying. The room felt smaller, more oppressive. The little girl's parents were as confused and scared as I was. We didn't know what to do, how to explain it. The feeling that something diabolical had been there, beyond our understanding, was haunting. In the days that followed, I tried to make sense of it. I talked to nurses and doctors, but no one had a clear answer. Some said it could have been a hallucination. Others just shrugged, uncomfortable with the subject. Ever since, I've lived with the question of what really happened that night. I like to think the world is logical, but this experience left me with the certainty that there are things beyond our understanding. Things that hide in the shadows, or perhaps below us, waiting for the right moment to show themselves. If you're enjoying the video, please subscribe the channel for future videos, and like and share with your friends. Hi, I'm Sophie, and I'm a nurse. I've always felt the need to help others, which led me to volunteer in a war-torn city in South Asia. The situation was dire. Hospitals were overflowing, and resources were almost non-existent. I was assigned to the children's ward, a place where innocence should thrive, but instead, it was overshadowed by the horrors of war. There was one boy who caught my attention. He was tiny, no more than 7 years old, and had lost his entire family in the attacks. His eyes were wide with fear, carrying the weight of the world. I tried to talk to him, to offer some comfort, but he never said a word. His silence was eerie. For 2 days, I cared for him, hoping my presence would bring him some companionship. I sat by his bed, read him stories, and shared the few moments of peace I could find amidst the chaos. But he remained silent, his gaze lost, often staring at a specific spot. On the third day, everything changed. When I entered the room, I found him sitting on the bed, staring at me with an intensity that made me worry. And finally, he spoke. His voice was barely a whisper, but clear enough for me to understand. "See him?" he asked. I was confused. "Who?" I asked, trying to stay calm. The boy slowly turned his head and pointed to a dark corner of the room. "He's watching us," he said, his voice trembling. I instinctively turned to the corner but saw nothing. The room was large, with several beds lined up. The only light came from the hallway, just shadows and curtains fluttering in the night breeze. "No one's here, honey," I said, trying to reassure him. The boy shook his head, his eyes wide. "He's always there," he said, "but sometimes he moves." I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. "Who?" I asked, even though part of me didn't want to know. "He's tall, very tall. He's wearing a black blanket, and he doesn't walk. He floats." I started to feel really sick. I looked around, feeling more exposed than usual. "Since when have you seen him?" I asked, my mouth dry. "Since I got here," he said. His words made me uneasy. I wanted to think it was just his imagination or the result of the trauma he'd experienced. But the way he looked at me told me this was real to him. In the following days, a dark pattern emerged. Children who had seemed stable began to worsen for no apparent reason. The room, once filled with murmurs and hopeful sighs, now echoed only with crying and despair. I couldn't shake the idea that what the boy had seen was related to what was happening. Every night, as I tried to rest, the boy's words repeated in my head. And then, I began to notice strange things. Shadows appearing where they shouldn't and fleeting movements in the corner of my eye. It was as if the darkness had taken on a life of its own. The atmosphere in the hospital grew heavy. I watched as more children succumbed to their injuries, their fragile bodies powerless to fight against whatever stalked them. Some staff members murmured about a curse, about an evil presence that had taken up residence in the ward. I searched for rational explanations, but deep down, something told me this was beyond logic. One night, I decided to stay late, hoping to see with my own eyes what tormented the boy. The ward was eerily silent, broken only by the constant beeping of the machines monitoring the faint lives still holding on. I sat in a chair by the window, watching every corner of the room, waiting for any sign. Hours passed, and when I was about to give up, I saw it. A shadow darker than night itself slithered across the back wall. It didn't walk. It hovered over the floor with unnatural grace, slowly approaching a little girl's bed. My heart pounded as I fought the instinct to flee. Something inside me told me to run, to get out of there. But I froze, staring at that sinister figure before my eyes. The shadow paused for a moment, and for an instant, I swear it looked right at me. An icy chill ran through my body, and in that moment, I knew for certain I was seeing something not of this world, that it was death itself. The next morning, the little girl was gone. Her empty bed was a brutal reminder of our powerlessness. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were completely helpless against whatever was stalking us. The boy who had told me about the figure sank into an even deeper silence. His eyes, once full of fear, were now empty, as if he'd seen too much. The following weeks were a constant struggle with the idea that there are things beyond our understanding. Things that lurk in the shadows, feeding on our fear and despair. I don't know what was haunting that hospital. I don't know if it was real or if the horror of war had opened a door to something we don't understand. Eventually, the boy was transferred to another facility, and I returned to Spain, carrying with me the weight of what I had witnessed. I never saw the boy again after that. Hello, I'm Maria. I've got a story that still gives me chills every time I think about it. I was just another patient in the hospital, recovering from a routine surgery, when things took a turn for the strange. I was in my room, trying to get some rest, when a teenager was admitted next door. I didn't see much of him, but I heard him all the time. His parents were always there, worried and talking about some kind of mental illness. But what really got my attention was what the nurses were saying. The doctors couldn't find anything wrong with him. His behavior was just too strange to explain. The first night, I noticed something off. The hospital, which is usually just the sound of machines beeping, felt different. I heard the boy screaming, and it wasn't just any scream. It was filled with a pain too deep for someone his age. But the worst part was when the screams would suddenly stop and turn into laughter. Not a normal laugh, but something creepy, like he was making fun of whatever was tormenting him. Then there were the lights. At first, they just flickered occasionally, but over time, they started turning on and off in a pattern, like someone was controlling them. And I started feeling like I wasn't alone in my room. Sometimes, I felt watched, like something was staring at me through the walls. And the smell. There was this unbearable stench like sulfur that made the air heavy and hard to breathe. It was like the whole atmosphere of the hospital had changed, becoming dark and oppressive. The nurses talked about how they tried to sedate him, but nothing worked. I heard one of them say, "It's like he's immune to any stimulus to his body, like no one can help him." That phrase stuck with me. It made me realize that what I was going through wasn't just a medical problem. By this point, I was feeling really unsafe and I begged to move rooms, but the hospital was full, so I had no choice but to stay there, trapped in a place where I no longer felt safe. One night, I was woken up by whispers. They were soft, but unmistakable, coming from somewhere beyond my room. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent, almost like pleading. I lay there, completely still, my mind racing with possibilities. Was it the boy? Was he trying to say something? Or was it something else? The next day, the nurses were even more tense than usual, talking in low voices and glancing nervously toward the boys' room. I caught bits of their conversation, words like exorcism and possession. I found it hard to believe, but the idea that something supernatural could be happening just feet away from me was unsettling. It all came to a head when the boy's parents brought in a priest. At first, I thought they were just looking for comfort, but soon after, the boy was taken out of the hospital without any explanation. Just like that, he was gone. It was a huge relief when he left, but what happened next was even more unsettling. Immediately, the oppressive feeling disappeared. The lights stopped flickering, the air felt lighter, as if the tense atmosphere had suddenly dissipated. It was at that moment that I understood that what was happening to that boy wasn't just an illness. There was something more, something sinister. I couldn't get the idea out of my head that maybe he was possessed by something beyond our understanding. I was left with so many questions, but no answers. That event made me question everything I thought I knew about the world, about what's possible and what's not. Could that boy really have been possessed? Or was it just a series of strange coincidences? I'll probably never know for sure. It's a story that has stayed with me, a reminder that sometimes it's what we can't explain that scars us the most. The world is full of mysteries, and this is one I'll never forget. Even today, I occasionally wonder what became of that boy, where he is, and if he finally found the peace he so desperately needed. In the end, everyone has their own beliefs about what's possible and what lies beyond what we understand. For me, this experience was a wake-up call, a reminder that the world is much stranger than we usually think. And sometimes, the scariest things aren't the ones we can see, but the ones hiding right at the edges of our reality. My name is Claudia Ramirez, and I've seen a lot in my time as a nurse here in Mexico. Nursing is hard work, but it's what I love doing, helping people when they're most vulnerable. Anyway, I want to share something quite shocking that happened to me during one of my night shifts. It's one of those stories that sticks with you, making you question the world and all its mysteries. Let me put it into context. It was during a particularly difficult time when violence was tearing through our city. There was so much going on, and we were all in a constant state of tension. One night, news came of a massacre, one of those tragedies you hear about but never want to witness. Within minutes, the hospital was filled with victims of the attack. The place was in chaos, everyone running around, trying to treat the endless stream of patients. You could feel the tension in the air. I was walking quickly down the hallway toward the emergency room, trying to stay calm while doing my job as best I could. That's when I saw her. A woman who looked to be in very bad shape, standing with tears in her eyes. She grabbed my arm tightly, surprising for someone who looked so fragile, and with a trembling voice, she begged me to save her son. She told me he was in the emergency room and desperately needed help. I promised her I'd do everything I could to help her son, trying to give her some peace of mind amid the chaos. She seemed to calm down a little, and I continued on my way, her words echoing in my head. It was one of those moments that feels strange, like something wasn't right, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. There was too much to do. The night dragged on, a blur of faces, voices, and the constant rush to save lives. It's hard to put into words how intense it was. We were all working on adrenaline, exhausted but with no time to stop because so many people needed us. Later, when the situation began to stabilize a bit, I was called back to the morgue for a document check. It's not a task anyone enjoys, but it's part of the job. My partner and I had to help organize the papers on the bodies of those who didn't make it. It's a grim job, but it must be done with respect. As we made our way through the morgue, the atmosphere felt heavy. My partner and I worked silently, methodically, organizing the unfortunate victims of that night's chaos. It was a task we'd done before, but tonight it felt different. The air seemed chillier, the silence deeper. I tried to stay focused on my work when I came to a body that made me freeze. I leaned closer, squinting in the dim light, making sure I wasn't seeing things wrong. My heart started beating faster as I stared at that familiar face. It was her, the woman I'd spoken to in the hallway, the one who'd begged me for her son's life, clutching my arm desperately. Her face was unmistakable. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as confusion and disbelief filled my mind with questions. I stood there for a few seconds trying to make sense of what I was seeing. How could she have been there, speaking to me, if now she was here, among the dead? It didn't make sense. It felt like the world had shifted beneath my feet. I took a step back, breathing heavily, feeling the room suddenly become claustrophobic. I wanted to call out to my partner, ask him to confirm that I wasn't losing my mind, but the words wouldn't come. As I stood there trying to make sense of the impossible, a thought crossed my mind, one I didn't want to accept, that maybe she came to me after she died. But I rejected the idea. I didn't want to accept something that challenged everything I understood. I finished my work, but I couldn't get that image out of my head. The memory of it remained etched in my mind. It was an experience that changed the way I see the world and the mysteries beyond our understanding. The following days were a roller coaster of thoughts and emotions. I learned that her son had survived. He was one of the lucky few who made it out alive that night. In the midst of so much tragedy, it was a small consolation, and I like to think that his mother's love had something to do with his recovery. This experience made me see things differently. As nurses, we are constantly on the brink of life and death, but this encounter showed me that sometimes the veil between the two is thinner than we think. It was a reminder that love and hope persist, even in the darkest moments. That's my story. I don't tell it to scare people, but to remind us all that there are invisible connections that unite us. Sometimes, the things we can't explain are the ones that teach us the most. And sometimes, the love we carry within us is strong enough to cross any barrier, even the one that separates life from death. Hello, I'm Margaret, and I want to share a story that my grandma used to tell us. She always told it with a mix of sadness and a little bit of fear. This happened about 6 years ago when she had to go to the hospital for some health issues. She has heart problems, so she ends up there pretty often. She had to stay overnight at the local hospital. It's a small place, since we live in a pretty poor town. The hospital doesn't let visitors stay after a certain time, and no family members are allowed to stay overnight. So, my grandma had to be alone most of the time, which really bothered her because she hates being alone. She says that's when she met the woman who became her night shift nurse. This nurse was super kind and always had a smile on her face. Unlike the other nurses, she would actually sit and chat with my grandma whenever she came to check on her or give her meds. My grandma says the nurse kept her company as much as she could, even though she had other patients to take care of on the same floor. My grandma was in the hospital for about 2 weeks, and she really got close to that nurse. She even thought of her as a friend. One of the last nights my grandma was there, she was really looking forward to seeing her favorite nurse. She felt so alone because nobody else paid attention to her, and she really needed someone to talk to. She was waiting anxiously for 9 p.m., which was when the nurse usually came on duty. But time passed and she didn't show up. It was almost time for my grandma's meds, and then she heard a knock on the door. My grandma got excited, thinking it was her. But when the door opened, it was a different nurse. My grandma had never seen her before. This new nurse just said goodnight, gave my grandma her meds, and left. My grandma couldn't help but ask where her usual nurse was. The new nurse was kind of rude and said she didn't know. She said she was just filling in for the night and didn't know anything else. My grandma was really sad because she wanted to talk to someone that night. She felt so alone. The night dragged on, and my grandma couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned until it was almost 3 a.m. Then, she turned to the window and saw her friend, the nurse, standing there, looking at her through the glass. My grandma smiled and waved. She thought the nurse would come in like she always did, but instead, the nurse just waved back, stood there for a few seconds, and then left. My grandma was shocked and confused. She didn't understand what was going on. She thought maybe the nurse was just busy, so she didn't think too much about it and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, when the day nurse came in with her meds, my grandma asked why there was a different nurse on duty the night before. The day nurse looked really sad and said, "I don't want to upset you, but Juanita passed away yesterday afternoon in a car accident." Juanita was the name of my grandma's nurse. My grandma couldn't believe it. She felt really sad, but there was something else. She remembered that Juanita had come to see her through the window the night before, like she was saying goodbye. My grandma didn't tell the nurse anything about what happened. She only told us her family. She says people might call her crazy or a liar, but we know her. She's a very serious woman, and she would never make something like that up. So we know it was real, and it's something that still affects her to this day. She gave me permission to share her story with you. I hope it gives you the same kind of chill it gave us.